for joining us this morning, the first day of school for so many, and I'm hoping that it's a great year for students, for education workers, and for families. It's been an eventful few days, hasn't it? After the resignation of the housing minister under some very dark clouds, Mr. Ford unveiled his slapdash new cabinet. Let me tell you, he can rearrange the deck chairs all he wants, but it doesn't change the fact that Ontarians are fed up with a corrupt government rigging the system. To help, by the way, just a select few of their insider friends get even richer and at the expense of everybody else. With this new hastily assembled team, he has even less of a reason to delay recalling the legislature. We should be back in the legislature today. And the reason we need to do that is so that we can restore the land back into the Greenbelt. It's time that Mr. Ford faced the music once and for all, and we are going to use every tool at our disposal as your official opposition NDP to make sure that this government recalls the legislature and eventually restores the land to the Greenbelt. And then we're going to keep pushing to uncover just how deep this government's corruption actually runs, because Ontarians deserve so much better than this. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
If the Premier is talking in, I guess, 25 minutes, if the Premier doesn't announce that he's going to rethink or redo the Greenbelt process, what does that say?
Well, it says to me that he hasn't gotten the memo. This is what Ontarians want to see. Ontarians are very, very angry. Most Ontarians, I think, were very angry before the scandals emerged. They knew something didn't smell right. And ultimately, they know that we need that land for important, absolutely crucial farmland and also those important ecosystems. And they also know, and they have never bought what Mr. Ford is serving, that this is about the housing crisis. This is not and has never been about solving the housing crisis. So I think if he doesn't immediately today announce that he is going to be restoring all of that land to the Greenbelt, then he just isn't getting the message that Ontarians have been sending him and that we have been raising every single day, certainly since these reports came out and going back to the initial plans to carve up the Greenbelt.
What do you make of the choice of Paul Calandra as the new housing minister?
Well, first of all, I would say that Mr. Calandra, his role in this government seems to be just simply to divert attention and distract. I don't see him as somebody who's going to actually build the housing that Ontarians need, and I don't think Ontarians will trust him to address the affordability crisis in Ontario right now. We need housing solutions that are going to actually address that missing middle, that are actually going to address the affordability crunch that we're seeing in this province. And I don't see Mr. Calandra addressing those things. That certainly hasn't been our experience with him so far.
Well, what are your suggestions then for that?
Oh, we've had lots of, we've introduced legislation. I mean, we have many solutions out there, but I think foremost, we need to actually start to get the government back in the business of building truly affordable housing again in this province. We need to introduce real rent control. We need inclusionary zoning. Right? I mean, there are report after report after report that serve up a menu of options, none of which include carving up the Greenbelt. The solutions are there. Municipalities, for the most part in this province, have approvals ready to go. You know, what we need is for the government to actually start to pay attention to this crisis and take action, real action, not just simply carving up our province to create more sprawl and more luxury housing, to gift their friends with these billion-dollar deals.
What do you make of the disarray we've seen? We've seen Clark hang on for 3-4 weeks, 2 very bad reports. The last one comes out Wednesday. He says he's going to hang on. It comes out Thursday, he and the Premier both say he's going to hang on, and then all of a sudden, Labor Day, he's gone. So what do you make of that? Is this a government in complete chaos?
You know, I think this government is in chaos, and I think that the corruption runs deep. And I think that's why the Premier has avoided kicking out Mr. Clark until now, or Mr. Clark resigning. We don't even know the full scope of the corruption yet, but we do know it runs deep. We know that the Premier refuses to share his records. We need him to come clean with Ontarians. And I think in the next few months, we are going to continue to be examining very closely other deals that this government has done. There's going to continue to be a lot more scrutiny. And, you know, this, as I said earlier, he can shuffle the deck chairs all they like to. But at the end of the day, it is the Premier himself who needs to answer to Ontarians, and he needs to come clean.
Do you see these changes, you know, a new minister, a new parliamentary assistant, a new chief of staff to the Ministry of Housing? Do you see that could be maybe a fresh, you know, outlook on housing?
Well, you know, I would say that, again, you know, we know that the direction came from the very top. According to two independent officers, right, we now know very clearly that the Premier's own mandate letter, which he has tried to keep secret, by the way, which he has hidden from Ontarians and even gone to court to try to hide, but his own mandate letter directed that along these lines. And so, and we know, we also just still do not know the extent of the Premier's full involvement in all of this. So I think until we have full transparency and accountability from this Premier, we're not going to really see any significant change, because at the end of the day, the issue is with this government. It's with this government and their focus, which has never been on addressing the issues of Ontarians. It's always been about making sure that their friends got richer and the wealthy got wealthier. And so I don't have any confidence in this government. I think, you know, I'm glad Mr. Clark finally took responsibility and stepped aside, but I will not be satisfied until we really get to the bottom of that. And the first step, and the most important step right now, is recalling the legislature so that we can return the land to the Greenbelt. And let me be absolutely clear. The government can accomplish some of that in regulation, but we need the legislature to return so that we can actually pass legislation so that those developers have less of a foothold in how that's going to take place, right? It's really critical that legislation be passed to return the land.
Do you think that this one mandate letter to the Minister of Housing was the one letter that made the government say we're going to keep it all secret? Or do you think that there's more that they...
Absolutely not. You're seeing the privatization of public health care in this province, education. We have multiple, infrastructure deals. People in this province know something doesn't smell right. The government is opening up, the provincial coffers, right, to private interests. And so, to me, that means that was mandated. That was absolutely mandated by the Premier himself. People in this province have a right to know what's going on. Corruption at this level is deeply concerning to Ontarians, and I believe it runs very deep in this government. And so it taints everything they do and everything they have done. So those mandate letters need to be made public. Absolutely. We've always said that. But again, my number one priority right now, and as we've been saying every single day, the Premier must return the land to the Greenbelt. It's the first thing he needs to do, and it's extremely important.
Stiles, would you be comfortable saying a few things in French about Paul Calderon's nomination as Minister of Housing?
Yes, I would, but if you don't mind, I have a separate note that I'd like to use for that, but I can do some questions en français avec toi. Okay?
One of the things that people have been talking about is the idea that if they return the land to the Greenbelt, the developers who have already started making plans for this property would sue. You've mentioned that they called for passing legislation. Would you support legislation that not only returns land to the Greenbelt, but also prevents developers from suing?
Well, I think legislation will make it, as I understand it, the legislation will make it more difficult for developers to have the foothold to sue the government. But geez, this is the path we always see this government go down. They canceled those wind contracts. They don't care. They don't care how many people they step on or how much it costs the people of this province. They just make their deals, and then they let people sue them, and they end up paying out of government coffers to cover their trail. The DRAP in particular, the return of that land requires legislation. That's why the legislature has to return. They can't just do it in back rooms and regulation. It won't be good enough. But yeah, they have left this province once again open to being, sued by developers because they never do things properly. And that's what happens when you have corruption like this. At the end of the day, someone pays the price, and you know who it is usually? It's the people of the province. It's the taxpayers of this province who pay the price for this government's missteps and corruption.
What do you think about Minister Mulroney being shuffled out of transportation?
Well, we've been calling for the minister's resignation for some time now over many issues, including, of course, the disaster of Metrolinx, the Eglinton Crosstown, the Ottawa LRT, situation after situation that she has mismanaged badly. So I don't think, given her track record, that we can trust her to manage the treasury of this province, and I don't think Ontarians do either.
Confidence in Mr. Sarkaria handling the transportation problem?
My concern is with the government themselves, the direction they've been given by the Premier, their lack of concern over these significant allegations of corruption. We are going to see more investigations coming out. I am going to use every tool we have in the toolbox and I know that we will maybe even seeing an RCMP investigation, but I think that, with the scope of the corruption and collusion in this situation, it calls into question all kinds of other deals, particularly, in big infrastructure deals. And so, I've already explained many times my concerns about Metrolinx. So, I don't have a whole lot of confidence that Mr. Sarkaria is going to make any difference there, unless we have responsibility taken at the top and real change in mandate and direction. And I honestly think so many of these deals are going to end up having to be reviewed now. Mm-hmm.
But Marit, isn't so much of what we've seen in these two reports reveal that the province's rules around lobbying are a farce?
We've called on the government, and I've introduced bills, as you know, to tighten up the Members' Integrity Act. We've called for tougher rules around lobbying, but at the end of the day, they can't even follow the rules that exist. It's not like rules don't exist. They do exist. They just don't pay any attention to them. And they circumvent them. Could we toughen up the rules? Absolutely. The Integrity Commissioner has called for changes repeatedly in his annual general reports. We've brought forward some of that legislation. The Conservative government and Mr. Ford have defeated those motions. They don't want to see it toughened up, well, for obvious reason. But they're breaking the laws as they exist. And unfortunately, so are some lobbyists. We'll see what the Integrity Commissioner's turns up with regard to this, so-called Mr. X and his alleged illegal lobbying activities. But, unless you have a government that actually has integrity, then every law is just a law to be broken or bent to their own purposes. Alors, je peux essayer de parler un peu en français. J'ai aucune confiance en M. Calandre comme ministère de... Qu'est-ce que c'est le mot en français pour housing? Logement, oui. Alors, j'ai aucune confiance avec M. Calandre comme ministère de logement. Pour moi, c'est M. Ford qui doit, no, see, I'm going to need some help with my vocabulary. But I am really concerned about this. I just saw Mr. Calandre in the legislature. I offered him my congratulations and my condolences because we're going to give him a hell of a ride. He's going to have to answer to the people of this province every single day. And I also will continue to call on the government to recall the legislature. But we can do some more in French. Yeah, en français. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're going to hear from the Premier soon, so I'll see you all following that. Thank you very much.